This is 26-year-old Donovan Winter being arrested in DeLand and Volusia County on murder and child abuse charges involving his infant son 4 years ago.
I'm happy he's arrested. We lived next to him for a really long time, and just to see his behaviors after everything happened, I always knew.
But residents we spoke to on and off camera, where the allegations happened, want to know why it took so long.
When their baby boy arrived in April 2021, Donovan and Belle said it felt like their lives finally made sense. They posted pictures, sent messages to friends, talked about how nothing had ever felt this pure. For a brief moment, they were exactly what they looked like, two young parents trying their best, holding on to something they believed would make everything better. Those early days were full of promise, the soft midnight feedings, the tiny hands gripping their fingers, the kind of joy that makes the world feel new. They would sit on the sofa in the living room and watch the Philadelphia Eagles versus Chargers game highlights most nights, as he was a fan of the Eagles team. But as the weeks passed, the reality of raising a newborn began to press harder than either of them expected. Sleep vanished, arguments started, and the effortless love they once felt was slowly replaced by nights that stretched too long and a crying newborn they didn't know how to soothe. Then came the morning of June 1st. Deputies walked into a room where a newborn should have been stirring for his first feed of the day. Instead, they found a stillness that didn't match the stories they were told. A stillness that hinted at something deeper, something that didn't begin that morning, but long before it. The joy that once filled those first pictures wasn't the whole story. Something had changed in that home, and the question investigators would spend years trying to answer was painfully simple. When did the happiness end, and what happened in the hours that followed? Before we begin tonight, I want to speak to you parent to parent, adult to adult, human to human, because after everything you will hear today, after walking through every moment this child never survived, there's a truth we can't escape. Children don't get to choose the adults who raise them. They don't get to choose the homes they grow up in. They don't get to leave when things become unbearable. They can't run, can't protect themselves, can't fight back. A child's entire world, their entire future, sits in the hands of the grown-ups around them. And when those hands fail them, the child doesn't get a second chance. Some of you watching right now are parents. Some are grandparents. Some are teachers. Some are simply people with a soft spot for children, the kind of heart that aches when you see a little one in pain. And I know that there are going to be moments in this story when you have to stop, look away, breathe through it. Moments that will make you imagine your own child, your niece, your nephew, the kid next door. Moments that will make you think, what if someone had stepped in sooner? What if someone had spoken up? Most of the cases we tell here, they never make it to Netflix. Not because they aren't important, but because they are too real, too raw, too heartbreaking for platforms that want polished tragedy instead of the painful truth. But these children deserve to be remembered. Their stories deserve to be told with care, with dignity, with the seriousness they were denied in life. And that's why we do what we do. Every episode on this channel takes hours, days of digging, verifying, cross-checking, and piecing together the reality behind the headlines. Because if these children never had a voice, the least we can do is make sure their silence is heard. At the end, if tonight shook you, if it reminded you to hug your child a little tighter, if it made you look at the kids in your life with more tenderness, more awareness, more gratitude, then I ask you, from my heart to yours, please subscribe. Not for entertainment, not for numbers, but because there's another child out there right now whose story risks being forgotten. Another case no one is telling. Another little life slipping through the cracks. Share this video so we could reach more audiences and perhaps help some who need the information we will share here today. Be sure to comment, as your insightful thoughts could be just what a child out there may depend on for survival. And maybe by staying here with us, by listening, by caring, you help bring just a little more light to the places where children are still hurting. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for remembering. And wherever you are tonight, please check on a child you love. It was 5:42 a.m., and most of the neighborhood was asleep. But for Donovan and Belle, the life their child was about to change. He had been alive hours before. His cries had filled the night. Tiny fists had waved. His little body had wiggled to demand attention. And yet now he lay silent, lifeless. This was a child who should have woken with the day. And yet, by sunrise, his world had stopped. The question investigators would ask that morning would not be simple, and it would take 4 years to answer. How does a healthy baby go to bed crying and never wake again? How does the innocence of life end in silence, while the world outside continues as if nothing has changed? The answers were not in this room. They were hidden elsewhere in the messages, the late-night texts, the moments of frustration and exhaustion that no one thought anyone would see. In the weeks before tragedy, the story of this family was being written on 2 small screens, text messages that the couple exchanged. Every text, every message, every frustrated word, all invisible to the world, until investigators discovered them. At first glance, these messages seemed ordinary, the tired words of young parents navigating sleepless nights. But investigators, months later, would notice something subtle, something unsettling in the rhythm of the texts. Each message became a breadcrumb and a trail that would lead investigators to the heart of the tragedy. That frustration led them to the point where they felt they could end their misery. Small, ordinary moments, the vibration of a phone, a message left unfinished, the quiet of a nursery, became evidence. Evidence that would later show the tension in the apartment wasn't just stress. It was a pressure cooker, building silently toward a night that no one could forget. And yet, the parents themselves seemed blind to what their words were revealing. To them, these were complaints. To investigators, they were a record of growing frustration, a record that would become central to understanding what happened that night. At what point do complaints turn into confessions? At what moment does exhaustion become evidence of something far more dangerous? The answers wouldn't come quickly. They would take months of investigation, interviews, and piecing together fragments of a story that the parents themselves couldn't fully admit. And somewhere in these threads, the first hints of what would become a tragedy were already waiting to be discovered. May 2025. 4 years had passed since that quiet morning in Merritt Island, when one small life ended and the world moved on. Investigators had traced every text, every clue, every whisper of evidence. And now, they were ready to hear the story from the parents themselves. Belle Winter sat across from them, hands folded, voice steady, but eyes distant. She claimed she had taken a long shower that night, 2 hours, she said. When she returned, her son had been fine. He was fine when I checked him, she said. Simple words, ordinary words, but every investigator in the room felt the weight behind them. Donovan Winter spoke next. He described a night that felt entirely different. He was crying, he admitted. I rocked him, maybe a little rough. Not violent, he insisted, just trying to soothe a baby who would not stop. Yet even as he spoke, his words shifted. Timelines blurred. Details contradicted themselves. Detectives paid attention to every micro-movement, hands fidgeting, a pen tapping nervously, a phone vibrating and going ignored. These spoke louder than the words themselves. Investigators noted it all. Every hesitation, every pause, every glance away told part of the story. The parents' accounts overlapped but never matched. Belle spoke of calm and stillness. Donovan recalled frantic cries, a baby rocking in his arms. One said 2 hours, the other 15 minutes. One described a gentle sway, the other a vertical bounce. One remembered the child at peace. The other remembered exhaustion, frustration, a body too heavy to soothe. And yet, amid these contradictions, a chilling pattern emerged. Both remembered everything, except the moment their son died. Memory shielded them. Denial protected them. Fear, guilt, or indifference blurred the lines between fact and fabrication. Yet they remembered watching the Philadelphia Eagles versus Chargers game a day earlier. Investigators pressed, but the answers were slippery. The parents flinched at certain questions, paused at others. Every motion, every reaction was a fragment of truth wrapped in a lie. And through it all, the silence of the apartment, the hum of the baby monitor, the empty crib behind them, reminded everyone in the room of what had been lost. Why did both parents remember so much, yet forget the one thing that mattered most? When the parents didn't give them much to work on, the investigators brought in medical professionals. The medical examiner spoke calmly, but the words cut deeper than any voice should. The baby had multiple blunt impact injuries, skull fractures, head trauma, evidence of violent shaking, injuries that no ordinary fall could explain. Not one accident, but many. Each mark, each bruise, each fracture told a story that no parent had spoken aloud. Investigators leaned in, eyes flicked from diagrams to x-rays, lingering on trajectories of force, the angles of impact. The baby's tiny skull, meant to cradle life, bore the imprint of repeated trauma, and with each image, the room seemed to shrink, as if the body itself was pressing its story into the walls. This was not a child who simply stopped crying. These injuries were deliberate, patterned, impossible to ignore. The narrative the parents offered, the long shower, the rocking, the crying that wouldn't stop, crumbled under the clarity of the evidence. The body spoke, the truth louder than their voices ever could. And yet, a chilling question hovered over everyone present. How does a 2-month-old sustain injuries that no one claims to have caused? How does a fragile life bear witness to violence adults refuse to admit? Somewhere in these fractures, these bruises, these tiny broken bones, was the story investigators had been seeking for 4 years. The answers were there, etched into the child's body, waiting for those willing to see them. But then there was not enough to charge them, so the police let them go. But they kept a close eye on them, as all evidence indicated their involvement. Even as the case seemed to fade into the background, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office refused to close the file. Weeks became months. Months became years. Every text, every phone record, every medical report was meticulously re-examined, cross-checked, scrutinized. Investigators pored over digital forensics, DCF reports, autopsy timelines. Each contradiction, every minor inconsistency in the parents' accounts, was a breadcrumb leading toward the truth. They knew the parents had lied. They knew frustration had escalated to danger. But in court, evidence could not be built on intuition alone. They needed the science, the timeline, the proof that linked words to actions, text to trauma, and silence to death. Years passed. Days of frustration, nights of review, phone records revisited. And in 2025, 4 years after the child's death, the case was airtight. Warrants were issued. Donovan Winter was arrested on June 17, 2025. Belle Winter, living in Pennsylvania, was extradited, brought back to answer for the choices that had silenced a life before it had truly begun. Even with arrests made, the weight of the question remained. Why did it take 4 years, for birthdays that would never happen, for months of grief and unanswered questions, to bring justice for a child who could not speak for himself? The investigation had refused to die, but the echoes of a lost life would never fade. By mid-2025, the justice system had caught up to the Winters. Both Donovan and Belle were formally charged, first-degree felony murder and aggravated child abuse. Neither was granted bond. The law had drawn a line that could not be crossed, holding them physically accountable for what their son could not survive. Prosecutors painted a picture of shared responsibility. One parent caused the injuries. The other, through absence, avoidance, or inaction, allowed the danger to persist. Together, their failures had formed a chain that ended in tragedy. The narrative of the case was not one of a single moment of cruelty. It was a story of accumulation, frustration, exhaustion, detachment, and escalating danger. It was a story of 2 young people, overwhelmed and unprepared, whose choices and inaction combined to silence a life before it had fully begun. Investigators, prosecutors, and the community wrestled with a single, impossible question. When both parents fail a child, how do you measure who is more responsible? Is it the hand that caused the injury, or the one that did not intervene? In the end, justice would seek an answer, but the weight of shared guilt, of collective neglect, could never be measured in full.